Hi, I'm Captain Alex Morgan. For years, my father mocked my military career, laughing at my pathetic Army salary and telling everyone that I'd thrown away my potential for a glorified welfare check. He thought humiliating me about my finances would prove that real success meant his Wall Street lifestyle, not my amateur soldier career. What he didn't know was that my classified special operations assignments.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you.
Had been earning me combat pay and hazard bonuses that accumulated into a $2.4 million check, one that would silence his mockery forever and expose him as a fraud who understood nothing about real sacrifice or success. The salary he mocked wasn't just numbers on a paycheck. It represented 8 years of the most demanding service in the United States Army, rising through the ranks from second lieutenant to captain in the elite 75th Ranger Regiment. My base pay might have seemed modest compared to his Wall Street bonuses, but it came with something his corporate salary never could: the knowledge that I'd earned every dollar through courage, competence, and commitment to something greater than personal wealth. What my father never understood was that military compensation extended far beyond the basic salary figures he'd found online and used to humiliate me at family gatherings. As a Ranger qualified officer specializing in counter-terrorism operations, I received hazardous duty pay, combat zone exclusions, and special operations bonuses that weren't reflected in the standard pay charts he'd researched to mock my career choice. My assignment to classified missions in hostile territories meant months of deployment where every day carried imminent danger pay, combat exclusion benefits, and hardship allowances that accumulated tax-free in accounts I couldn't discuss due to operational security requirements. While my father counted his quarterly bonuses from stock market manipulation, I was earning money by leading teams through operations that required split-second decisions, where failure meant American soldiers didn't come home alive. The foundation of my military career had been built at West Point, where I'd graduated in the top 10% of my class with a degree in international relations and a specialty in Middle Eastern studies. But to my father, the military academy was just subsidized college that led to a dead-end government job instead of the Ivy League MBA and Wall Street career he'd planned for me since childhood. Growing up as the daughter of Robert Morgan, senior vice president at Goldman Sachs, meant that success was measured exclusively by annual income and social status. Our Manhattan penthouse was a showcase of financial achievement, where dinner party conversations revolved around stock portfolios, real estate investments, and the latest luxury acquisitions that demonstrated wealth and influence. Alex has always been idealistic, my father would tell his colleagues during the charity galas and corporate events that defined our family's social calendar. She thinks she can save the world with patriotism and good intentions, but she'll learn that money is what actually drives change in this world. From his perspective, my decision to attend West Point instead of Harvard Business School was an act of rebellion that would cost me millions in potential earnings over my lifetime. He'd calculated the financial difference between a military officer's salary and an investment banker's compensation, presenting me with spreadsheets that showed how my misguided idealism would leave me financially inferior to my Wall Street peers. But what he'd never calculated was the value of the skills I was developing, the security clearances I was earning, and the specialized knowledge that made me invaluable for operations he couldn't imagine and wouldn't understand if I could explain them. While he managed portfolios for wealthy clients who wanted to get richer, I was managing life and death situations where tactical decisions determined whether terrorist threats were neutralized or American cities face attack. The Rangers had trained me in skills that no business school taught: leading teams under pressure, making strategic decisions with incomplete information,
operating in environments where mistakes cost lives rather than money. These capabilities, combined with my security clearances and operational experience, would eventually translate into financial opportunities that dwarfed anything Wall Street could offer. But my father saw none of that potential. To him, I was the daughter who'd chosen a low-paying government job over the lucrative career path he'd mapped out for my life, disappointing him with every promotion and commendation that proved my military success, while confirming my financial failure by his standards.
For the first 18 years of my life, Robert Morgan was everything a daughter could admire. Brilliant, successful, and completely devoted to providing his family with the best of everything money could buy. As one of Goldman Sachs' youngest senior vice presidents, he'd built his reputation on aggressive investment strategies that generated massive returns for elite clients who trusted him with generational wealth. Our relationship had been built on shared intellectual curiosity and mutual respect for achievement. He'd taught me to analyze financial markets during weekend trips to his office, explained complex economic theories during family dinners, and encouraged my competitive nature by celebrating every academic victory as validation of the Morgan family's superior intelligence. Alex is going to be even more successful than I am, he'd tell his Wall Street colleagues during the charity events and corporate galas that filled our social calendar. She has the analytical mind for high-level finance and the competitive drive to dominate whatever market she chooses to enter. My father had carefully orchestrated my path toward Wall Street success from childhood. I attended the best private schools in Manhattan, studied with tutors who specialized in preparing students for Ivy League admission, and spent summers interning at financial firms where I learned the language and culture of high-stakes investing. When I was accepted to both Harvard Business School and West Point, my father's initial reaction had been pride mixed with strategic calculation. Harvard is obviously the right choice, he'd said, already envisioning how a Harvard MBA would accelerate my entry into the elite financial circles where real wealth was created and managed. But as I researched both options, something about West Point appealed to values I hadn't known I possessed. The concept of service before self, the emphasis on honor and integrity, the opportunity to lead soldiers rather than manipulate markets. It all felt more meaningful than managing portfolios for people who already had more money than they could spend in multiple lifetimes. Dad, I've decided to accept the appointment to West Point, I told him during what I had expected to be a celebration dinner at his favorite Manhattan steakhouse. His fork had stopped halfway to his mouth, and for the first time in my life, I'd seen my father genuinely speechless. Alex, that's not funny. West Point is for people who don't have better options. You have Harvard Business School acceptance. You have connections in the financial industry. You have a guaranteed path to extraordinary wealth. Maybe I want to do something more important than making rich people richer, I'd replied, not yet understanding how deeply this decision would wound his vision of our shared future. The conversation that followed revealed assumptions about our relationship I'd never recognized. My father hadn't just been proud of my achievements, he'd been investing in his own legacy, expecting me to carry the Morgan name into the next generation of Wall Street dominance. My choice of military service over financial success felt like personal rejection of everything he'd worked to build. Alex, you're making a mistake that will define the rest of your life, he'd said, his voice carrying the disappointment of someone watching a carefully constructed plan collapse. Military officers make government salaries, while Harvard MBAs make fortunes. You're choosing poverty over prosperity for reasons I don't understand. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
But even after I'd committed to West Point, my father had maintained hope that military service would be a temporary phase, something I would outgrow once I experienced the financial limitations of government employment. He'd supported me through the academy, attended my commissioning ceremony, and even expressed pride when I was selected for Ranger School. Maybe this military experience will actually help your business career, he told his colleagues, repositioning my service as leadership training that would eventually enhance my effectiveness in corporate environments.
Alex is learning discipline and team management skills that will make her an even better executive when she's ready to enter the real business world. The real business world. As if national defense and counterterrorism operations were less important than stock market speculation and wealth management for people who measured success by the size of their third vacation home.
The betrayal began during my promotion ceremony to captain, when my father should have been celebrating my achievement, but instead chose to humiliate me in front of my fellow officers and their families. The ceremony was held at Fort Benning, with hundreds of people gathered to honor those of us receiving new ranks and recognition for our service. After the formal ceremony, families mingled during the reception, sharing pride in their soldiers' accomplishments. My father had flown down from New York for the event, and I'd been excited to introduce him to my commanding officers and fellow Rangers who'd become my closest brothers and sisters in arms. "So this is what a captain's salary gets you," my father said loudly as he examined my dress uniform, his voice carrying enough volume to ensure nearby families could hear his commentary. "All that training and leadership responsibility for what, $60,000 a year? Alex could make that in a month on Wall Street." The comment landed like a grenade in the middle of conversations about service and sacrifice. Other families stared in uncomfortable silence, while my father continued his assessment of my career choice as if it were a failed business investment rather than military service. "Dad, this isn't the time or place," I whispered, hoping to redirect his attention before he embarrassed us both further. But my father was just getting started. He'd apparently prepared remarks for the occasion, treating my promotion ceremony like a business meeting where he could present data about my poor financial decisions. "I've calculated what Alex has given up by playing soldier," he announced to Colonel Martinez, my battalion commander, as if sharing market analysis with a potential client. "Harvard MBA graduates in her class are now making six-figure bonuses on top of their base salaries. Meanwhile, she's here collecting government paychecks and pretending it's meaningful work." Pretending it's meaningful work in front of officers who'd risked their lives in Afghanistan and Iraq, families who'd endured deployments and sacrifices, and soldiers who'd chosen service over profit despite having other options. Colonel Martinez, a decorated veteran of 3 combat tours, listened with the kind of polite patience that military officers master when dealing with difficult civilians. "Sir, your daughter is one of our finest officers. Her leadership and tactical skills have been exceptional." "Leadership skills don't pay for Manhattan apartments or build retirement portfolios," my father replied dismissively. "Alex had opportunities to make real money, but she chose this government job instead. I keep hoping she'll grow out of it and start a serious career." Grow out of it? As if 8 years of military service, Ranger qualification, and specialized training in counterterrorism operations were teenage rebellion rather than professional commitment to protecting American interests worldwide. The conversation continued for 20 minutes, with my father providing detailed financial comparisons between my military salary and what he considered real jobs in corporate America. He'd brought printouts of salary surveys and investment projections, treating my promotion ceremony like an intervention where he could present evidence of my poor life choices. "Alex is wasting her potential," he told Major Stevens, one of my mentors who'd recommended me for special operations assignment. "She's smart enough for executive positions that would set her up for life, but she's stuck in this dead-end government work that barely pays a living wage." The betrayal wasn't just personal. It was public humiliation designed to undermine my standing within the military community that had become my chosen family. My father was systematically destroying my moment of achievement by reducing my service to a financial mistake rather than a commitment to something greater than personal wealth. In the months following the promotion ceremony humiliation, my father launched a systematic campaign to justify his public dismissal of my military career by positioning himself as the concerned parent trying to guide a misguided daughter toward financial responsibility. Every family gathering became an opportunity to reinforce his narrative about my poor life choices. I know Alex's feelings were hurt at the ceremony, he told my mother during one of their conversations that I overheard during a family visit. But someone had to tell her the truth about her financial future. She's living in a fantasy where government work provides real security. The truth. As if my father's obsession with Wall Street salaries represented objective reality rather than a narrow worldview that measured human worth exclusively through annual income and stock portfolio growth. He began sharing carefully edited versions of my military service with his Wall Street colleagues, stripping away any context that might suggest importance or value. When I mentioned completing advanced training in Middle Eastern languages and cultures, my father translated it for business associates as, "Alex is still playing Army and learning hobbies that won't help her career." When I described the tactical leadership challenges of managing Ranger operations, he retold it as, "Alex is enjoying her government-funded adventure camp while her Harvard Business School classmates are building real wealth and establishing themselves in serious careers." The most damaging aspect of his campaign was how he recruited other family members to participate in the financial intervention. My Uncle David, who worked as a corporate lawyer, started asking patronizing questions about my retirement planning and whether I'd thought seriously about my financial future. "Military pensions are nice," Uncle David would say, with the kind of condescending tone usually reserved for discussing children's allowances, "but they're not going to provide the lifestyle Alex grew up with. Maybe it's time to think about transitioning to private sector work where her education could generate real returns." Real returns, as if protecting American lives and national security interests were less valuable than generating profit margins for corporations that contributed nothing to society beyond shareholder wealth. My father also began controlling the family narrative about success and contribution by positioning his Wall Street work as essential to American prosperity, while characterizing my military service as unnecessary government spending. His investment strategies were presented as job creation and economic growth, while my counterterrorism operations were described as Alex's expensive hobby that taxpayers have to fund. "I'm not criticizing military service in general," he would tell relatives during family dinners, "but Alex had opportunities to contribute to society through business leadership and wealth creation. Instead, she chose this government job that barely pays a living wage and doesn't utilize her real potential." The financial comparisons became a constant theme at every family interaction. "Alex's annual salary is less than my quarterly bonus," he'd tell anyone who would listen. "She could be making that amount monthly if she'd chosen a serious career path instead of this extended adolescence in uniform." But perhaps the most insidious manipulation was how my father reframed my classified work as evidence that my job wasn't real because I couldn't discuss operational details. When family members asked about my assignments and I explained that operational security prevented me from sharing specifics, my father would smile knowingly. "That's Alex's way of making her government job sound more important than it actually is. She can't talk about her work because there's nothing significant to discuss. Real executives have achievements they can share and quantify." He began convincing our extended family that my inability to discuss classified operations was proof that my work was mundane government bureaucracy rather than critical national security missions. My operational security requirements became evidence of professional inadequacy rather than the highest levels of military responsibility. "If Alex's job were actually important," my father told my grandmother during one particularly painful family gathering, "she'd be able to explain what she does and show concrete results. The secrecy is just government inefficiency disguised as significance." By the time I received orders for my next deployment, my father had successfully positioned my military career as an expensive mistake that the family should patiently endure until I came to my senses and pursued meaningful work in the private sector.
The awakening came during my deployment briefing for Operation Silent Thunder, a classified mission that would redefine my understanding of what military service could mean, both personally and financially. I was sitting in a secure briefing room at Fort Bragg, reviewing operational parameters for what would become the most dangerous and lucrative assignment of my military career. Captain Morgan, Colonel Davidson began, sliding a classified folder across the table. You've been selected for a joint special operations mission that requires your specific skill set: Arabic language proficiency, cultural intelligence expertise, and proven leadership under extreme pressure. The mission details were heavily classified, but the basics were straightforward enough. Lead a small team of elite operators in gathering intelligence on terrorist financing networks operating along the Afghanistan-Pakistan border. The operation would last 18 months, involve significant personal risk, and require complete communications blackout with family members. The hazard pay and combat exclusions for this assignment are substantial, the colonel continued, showing me compensation documents that made my eyes widen. You'll receive hostile fire pay, hardship duty location allowance, family separation allowance, and combat zone tax exclusions. All accumulated earnings will be deposited in a special account that you won't access until mission completion. I stared at the financial breakdown, calculating numbers that seemed almost impossible. Base pay, special duty pay, hazard allowances, combat exclusions, it all added up to monthly compensation that exceeded my father's quarterly Wall Street bonuses. But more than the money, this was the kind of mission that proved the value of everything he'd dismissed as playing soldier. "Sir, what makes this assignment different from standard deployments?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer involved the kind of classified work that my father claimed didn't exist. "Captain, you'll be operating in areas where conventional forces can't go, gathering intelligence that directly impacts national security decisions made at the highest levels of government. Your work will influence policy, prevent terrorist attacks, and protect American lives in ways that may never be publicly acknowledged." This was exactly what my father insisted was impossible: military work that mattered at strategic levels, that required the kind of expertise he claimed the military didn't value, that generated financial compensation he'd said government service could never provide. But the most profound awakening wasn't financial. It was the realization that my father's dismissal of military service revealed his fundamental misunderstanding of how real security was created and maintained. While he moved money around financial markets to generate wealth for people who already had more than they needed, I would be preventing terrorist attacks that could devastate American cities and kill thousands of innocent people. "Colonel, my family doesn't understand the classified nature of my work," I said, thinking about my father's constant demands for concrete evidence of my professional value. "They think secrecy means the work isn't important." Colonel Davidson smiled with the kind of understanding that comes from dealing with similar family dynamics throughout his career. "Captain, the most important work we do is often the work we can never discuss. Your family measures success by what can be publicly displayed and financially quantified. But national security depends on operations that remain invisible, and soldiers whose achievements can never be celebrated." The conversation continued for another hour, covering operational details, security protocols, and the personal sacrifices required for this level of classified work. When I left the briefing room, I understood that I was about to embark on a mission that would validate everything my father had dismissed while generating financial returns that would silence his mockery forever. But more importantly, I was finally clear about the fundamental difference between our worldviews. My father created wealth by manipulating financial instruments that benefited people who already had more than they needed. I was about to risk my life gathering intelligence that would protect millions of Americans who would never know my name or understand my contribution to their safety. The irony was perfect. My father's greatest criticism, that military work wasn't financially rewarding, was about to be proven spectacularly wrong by the very mission that would demonstrate the strategic importance he'd always denied existed. I called him that evening to inform him about my upcoming deployment, without mentioning the financial implications that would soon transform our entire relationship.
My strategy for dealing with my father's ongoing mockery was elegantly simple. Let him continue believing his narrative about my poor financial choices while I executed the most lucrative mission of my military career. The 18-month deployment would accumulate compensation that would transform our entire dynamic, but I decided to let the results speak louder than any argument I could make. The psychological warfare aspect was crucial. My father had spent years positioning himself as the financial expert who understood money while I remained naive about real-world economics. He genuinely believed that military service represented financial incompetence, that my education was being wasted on government work, and that I'd eventually recognize my mistake and seek his guidance to transition into serious career paths. Alex is finally going to learn about real sacrifice, he told my mother after I'd informed them about the deployment, apparently unaware that I could hear his conversation from the next room. 18 months in Afghanistan for government pay will teach her what she's missing by not pursuing legitimate business opportunities. The beauty of his misunderstanding was how completely he'd dismissed operational security as military inefficiency, rather than recognizing it as protection for strategically important work. When I explained that I couldn't discuss mission details or communicate regularly during deployment, my father interpreted this as confirmation that my assignment was routine bureaucracy rather than classified operations. She can't talk about her work because there's nothing important to discuss, he told his Wall Street colleagues, positioning my communications restrictions as evidence of professional inadequacy, rather than the highest levels of security clearance and operational responsibility. But the financial strategy was the most satisfying element of my plan. The compensation structure for Operation Silent Thunder was unlike anything in civilian employment. Base pay multiplied by hazard allowances, combat exclusions that made earnings tax-free, and special operations bonuses that reflected the extreme risk and specialized skills required for the mission. Colonel Davidson had explained the accumulation process during our final briefing. Captain, your earnings will be deposited monthly in a secure account that you won't access until mission completion. This prevents operational security breaches and ensures maximum financial benefit from combat exclusions and hazardous duty allowances. The mathematics were staggering. 18 months of deployment at the highest compensation levels available to military personnel, all accumulating tax-free in an account that would grow to proportions my father couldn't imagine when he mocked my pathetic military salary. More importantly, the mission itself would prove the strategic value of work he'd characterized as meaningless government employment. I'd be gathering intelligence that influenced national security decisions, preventing terrorist attacks that could devastate American cities, and operating in environments where corporate executives like my father would last approximately 15 minutes before requiring rescue by soldiers they considered financially unsuccessful. The contrast would be undeniable. While my father spent 18 months manipulating stock portfolios to generate wealth for people who were already wealthy, I'd be risking my life to protect American lives and accumulating compensation that would exceed his annual Wall Street bonuses. But perhaps the most crucial element of the strategy was patience. I could have explained the financial reality of special operations assignments, could have detailed the compensation packages available to military personnel with my qualifications and security clearances. Instead, I chose to let my father continue his narrative about military financial inadequacy while I proved him wrong through results rather than arguments. The operational security requirements that he mocked as inefficiency would prevent him from learning about my actual earnings until I chose to reveal them. The classified nature of my work that he characterized as evidence of unimportance would be protecting information about compensation levels that would shatter his assumptions about military financial limitations. When I returned from deployment, I wouldn't need to argue about the value of military service or defend my career choices against his financial criticism. I'd simply present evidence that would silence his mockery forever and force him to confront the reality that his understanding of success and compensation was far more limited than he'd ever imagined. The daughter he'd accused of financial naivety was about to demonstrate financial success that would exceed anything his Wall Street expertise had
ever generated.
18 months later, I stepped off the transport plane at Dover Air Force Base with a duffel bag, a chest full of commendations I couldn't discuss, and access to a bank account that would redefine everything my father thought he knew about military compensation. Operation Silent Thunder had been completed successfully, with intelligence gathered that prevented 3 major terrorist attacks and led to the capture of key financing operatives across 2 continents. But the mission's strategic success was only part of the story. The financial execution had been flawless. 18 months of maximum hazard pay, combat zone exclusions, hardship allowances, and special operations bonuses accumulating tax-free in an account I hadn't touched since deployment began. The total amount was so substantial that I'd initially thought there had been an accounting error. $2.4 million. More money than my father's best year on Wall Street, earned through service that protected American lives rather than manipulating financial markets for people who were already wealthy beyond necessity. The first call I made after reaching stateside was to my father, who answered with the condescending tone he'd perfected during my deployment. "Alex, welcome home. I hope you've had time to think about your future during this extended camping trip. Your mother and I have been discussing career transition opportunities that might help you catch up financially with your peers." Extended camping trip. 18 months of classified operations that had required expertise in Arabic, cultural intelligence, tactical leadership, and the kind of decision-making under pressure that kept international terrorist networks from acquiring weapons capable of destroying American cities. "Dad, I appreciate your concern about my financial future," I said, walking toward the base administrative office where I'd begin the process of accessing accumulated combat pay. "Actually, I've been thinking about making some significant investments now that I'm back." "Investments?" His voice carried the patronizing amusement of someone humoring a child's unrealistic dreams. "Alex, you'll need to be realistic about your financial limitations. Military salaries don't generate investment capital. Maybe we should start with basic financial planning and work toward larger goals over time." Basic financial planning, from a man who had no idea that his daughter had just completed the most financially lucrative assignment in special operations history while gathering intelligence that influenced national security policy at the highest levels of government. "Dad, I'm going to need some advice about managing substantial liquid assets," I said, enjoying the confusion I could hear in his silence. "The kind of money that requires serious wealth management strategies rather than basic budgeting." "Alex, what are you talking about? Your military salary wouldn't generate substantial liquid assets unless you'd been saving every penny for years, which would be financially foolish given inflation and opportunity costs." I'd reached the administrative office where Staff Sergeant Martinez was waiting with paperwork that would transfer $2.4 million from my deployment account to my personal banking. The numbers on the documents looked surreal even to me. Monthly combat pay that had exceeded my father's quarterly bonuses, accumulated over 18 months and protected from taxation by combat zone exclusions. "Dad, I need to handle some banking business, but I'd like to discuss investment strategies when I get home next week. I'm looking at portfolio diversification for amounts that might exceed your current expertise." Exceed your current expertise. The phrase hit him like I'd hoped it would, a reversal of years of his condescending comments about my financial naivety and career limitations. "Alex, exactly how much money are we discussing?" he asked, his Wall Street instincts finally overriding his assumptions about military compensation. $2.4 million in liquid assets, earned tax-free during the deployment you characterized as an extended camping trip, I said, signing documents that officially transferred combat pay earnings that would silence his mockery forever. The silence on the other end of the phone was profound. The sound of a man whose entire understanding of success, compensation, and the value of different career paths was being demolished by information that contradicted everything he believed about his daughter's poor financial choices. "That's impossible," he finally whispered. "Military personnel don't earn that kind of money. You must be confused about the amounts or there's been some kind of accounting error." "Dad, there's no error. This is what special operations pays when you're willing to risk your life for something more important than stock market manipulation. I'll see you next week to discuss investment strategies for money you didn't think existed."
The meeting that would forever alter our family dynamic took place in my father's home office, the same room where he'd once calculated the financial cost of my military career and presented spreadsheets proving my poor life choices. Now, I sat across from his massive mahogany desk with bank statements that would shatter every assumption he'd made about military compensation and the value of my service. "Alex, I've been researching military pay scales since your phone call," my father said, his voice carrying the strained confidence of someone clinging to a narrative that was about to collapse. "Even with combat pay and hazard bonuses, the numbers you mentioned aren't possible. You must have misunderstood something about your compensation package." I placed the bank statements on his desk with the same deliberate precision he'd once used to present his evidence of my financial inadequacy. The documents were official, verified, and undeniable. 18 months of special operations combat pay that had accumulated to $2.4 million in tax-free earnings. "Dad, these are direct deposits from the Department of Defense to my personal account," I said, watching his face as he scanned numbers that contradicted everything he thought he knew about military compensation. "Special operations personnel with my security clearances and language qualifications earn hazard pay rates that exceed most Wall Street salaries." His hands trembled slightly when he examined the monthly deposit records, amounts that ranged from $110,000 to $180,000, depending on operational tempo and risk assessments. Each entry was labeled with codes indicating hostile fire pay, hardship duty allowances, and special operations bonuses that reflected the extreme danger and specialized skills required for classified missions. "This says you were earning more per month than I make in a quarter," he whispered, his voice stripped of the condescension that had characterized our relationship for years. "Dad, that's correct. Counterterrorism operations in hostile territories pay substantially more than portfolio management for wealthy clients," I replied, allowing myself a moment to savor the complete reversal of our financial dynamic. But the most devastating revelation wasn't financial, it was operational. I showed him redacted mission summaries that had been declassified for family notification, documents that proved the strategic importance of work he dismissed as meaningless government employment. Operation Silent Thunder prevented terrorist attacks that could have killed thousands of Americans, I explained, pointing to intelligence assessments that detailed thwarted plots against major cities. "While you were moving money around financial markets, I was gathering information that protected American lives and influenced national security decisions at the highest levels of government." His face strained from the color when he realized that his daughter's camping trip had been protecting the very country whose economic systems generated his Wall Street wealth. His dismissive comments about military service being less important than corporate finance suddenly sounded not just wrong, but grotesquely ignorant. "The secrecy you mocked as inefficiency was protecting operations that your security clearance couldn't access. The classified nature of my work that you said proved it wasn't important was actually evidence that it was too important to discuss with civilians." My father stared at documents that proved his fundamental misunderstanding of how national security worked, how elite military personnel were compensated, and how strategic importance was measured in government service. "Alex, I had no idea," he said finally, his voice carrying genuine shock rather than his usual dismissive confidence. "Dad, you spent years mocking my career without bothering to research what I actually did or how I was compensated. You assumed that government service meant financial limitation because you couldn't imagine work that was more valuable than generating wealth for people who were already wealthy." The reversal was complete. The father who'd laughed at my pathetic military salary was now staring at evidence that his daughter had earned more money serving her country than he had ever made manipulating financial markets for corporate clients. But more than the financial vindication, this was about respect for service,
sacrifice, and the understanding that some work matters more than profit margins in bonus structures.
5 years after my father learned about my $2.4 million combat paycheck, I stood in the Pentagon briefing room addressing a joint session of military leadership and Congressional Defense Committee members about the strategic value of special operations compensation and the critical importance of retaining elite personnel through competitive financial packages. The audience included generals, admirals, senators, and defense contractors, many of whom had previously questioned whether military compensation could compete with private sector opportunities for top-tier talent. My presentation used real data from Operation Silent Thunder and subsequent missions to demonstrate how proper compensation for classified work attracted and retained personnel whose skills were literally priceless for national security. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, clicking to a slide showing retention rates for special operations personnel, "we've learned that competitive compensation for elite military roles doesn't just attract talent, it ensures that our most sensitive operations are conducted by personnel who choose service over profit, not because they can't access profit." My father sat in the gallery, now serving as an unpaid advisor to the Department of Defense on military financial planning and veteran transition services. The man who'd once mocked military salaries had become one of the Pentagon's most effective advocates for ensuring that service members understood and maximized their compensation packages, especially those in high-risk, high-value assignments. The transformation had been gradual but complete. After learning about my combat pay, my father had spent months researching military compensation structures, discovering benefits and allowances he'd never known existed. His Wall Street expertise, once used to diminish my career choice, was now being applied to help military families optimize their financial strategies. The average special operations officer with Captain Morgan's qualifications can earn more in hazardous deployments than most corporate executives, he'd written in his widely read article for Military Family Financial Planning magazine. I spent years misunderstanding my daughter's career because I measured military service by base pay rather than total compensation potential. The article had gone viral in military circles, with thousands of families sharing it as validation of their service members' financial wisdom. My father had become an unlikely spokesperson for military financial literacy, using his corporate background to translate complex military benefit structures into language that civilian families could understand. But perhaps the most satisfying triumph was institutional. The Operation Silent Thunder case study had influenced Pentagon policy on special operations compensation, leading to increased hazard pay rates and better financial education for personnel in classified assignments. My mission had not only earned substantial combat pay, but had also improved compensation structures for future generations of elite military personnel. The book I'd co-authored with my father, Hidden Military Wealth, The Complete Guide to Special Operations Compensation, had become required reading at military financial planning workshops nationwide. The irony wasn't lost on anyone that the man who'd once laughed at military salaries was now teaching families how to maximize earnings from military service. Speaking engagements took us across the country, sharing our story with military families, corporate executives, and financial planning professionals who needed to understand that service and profit weren't mutually exclusive concepts. The message was always the same. Military service could provide both personal fulfillment and financial success for those willing to pursue elite assignments. Our relationship had been completely rebuilt on mutual respect rather than financial condescension. My father now understood that my daughter's career involved responsibilities and compensation levels that his Wall Street experience couldn't have prepared him to evaluate. More importantly, he'd learned that measuring success purely through annual income ignored the strategic value of work that protected the very systems that generated civilian wealth. The daughter he'd accused of financial naivety had taught him that some careers required classified expertise to understand their true value, and that the most important work often happened at compensation levels that civilian salary surveys couldn't capture.
Most remarkably, my father had used his financial transformation to help hundreds of military families recognize opportunities he'd once dismissed as impossible. The man who'd mocked my pathetic salary had become the military community's most effective advocate for understanding the hidden wealth potential in specialized government service. Sometimes, the people who doubt you most become your greatest allies once they understand what they were too ignorant to recognize initially.
Standing in my home office 8 years later, looking at the framed photo of my father and me at the Pentagon during my promotion to major, I finally understood the profound gift his mockery had given me. His years of financial criticism had pushed me to pursue the most challenging and lucrative assignments in military service, ultimately leading to achievements and compensation that exceeded anything either of us had imagined possible. My son Michael, now 4 years old, with his father's analytical mind and my stubborn determination, discovered me studying the image one evening as I prepared for a lecture at Harvard Business School about non-traditional career paths to financial success. "Mommy, why did Grandpa used to be mean about your soldier job?" he asked with the innocent directness that cuts through adult complications to reach essential truths. I'd been dreading this conversation, knowing that eventually I'd need to explain why his grandfather had once dismissed his mother's career, why some family stories included conflict rather than support, why relationships sometimes required fundamental transformation before they could become healthy. "Sometimes, sweetheart, people think they understand things when they really don't," I said, lifting him onto my lap while he played with his toy helicopter, a gift from his grandfather who now understood the strategic importance of military aviation. "Grandpa thought my job wasn't important because he didn't know what I really did." "But now he knows?" Michael asked with the logical progression that children apply to complex situations. "Now he knows that different jobs are important in different ways, and that you can't judge someone's work unless you really understand what they do." What my father's years of dismissal had taught me was the difference between perceived value and actual worth, between surface-level understanding and deep expertise. True success, I'd learned, wasn't determined by external validation or family approval, but by the intersection of personal values, professional competence, and meaningful contribution to something larger than individual advancement. The wisdom I'd gained from his mockery extended far beyond personal vindication. Through my military career and subsequent consulting work, I'd seen how societal misconceptions about government service prevented talented people from pursuing careers that could provide both financial success and strategic importance. One of the most valuable lessons I've learned, I told audiences at business schools and military academies, is that the careers we dismiss as financially limiting are often the ones that offer the greatest opportunities for those willing to pursue excellence rather than accept mediocrity. This perspective had influenced how we approached military recruitment and civilian career counseling. Instead of competing with private sector salaries at entry level, we focused on demonstrating the long-term financial potential available to military personnel who pursued specialized training and elite assignments. My father's transformation from skeptic to advocate had become a powerful case study for career counselors working with families who misunderstood military financial potential. His corporate background allowed him to speak credibly to business-oriented families about opportunities they'd previously overlooked or dismissed. I spent 8 years making the biggest mistake of my professional life. I measured my daughter's military career by entry-level pay scales rather than researching the compensation available for specialized roles. I nearly cost her my support during the most important work of her life. Our relationship had been rebuilt on mutual respect and shared mission, rather than financial competition. My father now understood that my daughter's career involved responsibilities and opportunities that his Wall Street experience hadn't prepared him to evaluate, while I'd learned that his business expertise could be valuable for helping military families optimize financial strategies.
But perhaps the most profound wisdom came from understanding that sometimes the people who challenge us most severely are providing exactly the motivation we need to achieve extraordinary results. My father's mockery had driven me to pursue assignments that proved military service could provide both personal fulfillment and financial success beyond civilian sector opportunities. The man who'd laughed at my pathetic military salary had inadvertently motivated me to earn more through specialized government service than he had ever made through traditional corporate success. His dismissal had become the catalyst for achievements that transformed both our relationship and our understanding of what constituted real wealth and meaningful work. Standing in my office, surrounded by evidence of the career he'd once mocked, I felt profound gratitude for a lesson neither of us had expected. Sometimes the most devastating criticism becomes the most powerful motivation when it forces you to prove doubters wrong through excellence they couldn't imagine possible.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.